Boom. All right. So, of course, we take our first couple of minutes.
Oh yeah, I see us. Yeah.
All right. Boom. Hey, go and get up out of here, though.
Yeah,
Thank you.
the size it looks good now. The size is good now.
All right. All right. All right. Good. Good.
Yeah, the size it looks good now. The size
I'm going to share it.
looks good now. The size is good.
All right. Of course, everything's going to start running slow, but
Here forward.
yep. All right. So, welcome back to another objectively aggressive podcast. I'm Kalvin. Of course, I have Dr. Ham with me on another Lighthouse series, episode 3, where we're going to talk about love and fear. So, in our sweet serenade today, as we talk about love and fear, I wanted to pick your brain about how people make moves based on whether it's love or fear. And you and I got into a quick conversation of loyalty and fealty, and I wanted to pick your brain about that. Like, what do you think when it comes to people? We were talking about decision making last week, and I wanted to talk love and fear with the decision making because I think people got it twisted. I think people always think about wants and needs, but when you talk about wants and needs, I take it to a higher consciousness to say people make the decisions based on love and fears. And
Yes.
so when we're talking about loyalty and we're talking about love and fears, I think people ask for loyalties, but when they're really wanting is fealties, because people subjectively look at loyalty and then call it love if you love me, but people are doing things out of fear and not love. You see what I just created for you?
Oh yeah, yeah. There's a point to talk about that. The idea of fealty, you got to go back to the medieval times because your fealty was to the sovereign or to the lord or to the person who had ownership of the land. And I think that the reason we understand it now is because your fealty or your loyalty was based off of your service or what you could provide. So when you didn't do what the Lord said, he was like, hey, get off my land.
Ooh.
So the idea became, I want to please the Lord so that I can have a better life for myself and my family. And so now we see where the idea of fealty, and that's from that Game of Thrones, bending the knee, it was a sign of submission, because you can't have fealty without submitting to something. And I think we live in an age where everybody wants to be the Lord, but nobody wants to be the submitter.
I would have to agree with that. Because like I think about this, and so I like this because it touches on relationships and stuff.
Yeah.
And it's like when you get there's this automatic assumption that when you get in a relationship with someone or you start dealing with someone, loyalty starts kicking in, right? There's like, okay, this is my expectation of how you're supposed to treat me and how I want to treat you. And it's like, okay, so what are these things based on, right? Because when you think about Game of Thrones, it's like what once you get into these situations with people, right? You start combining resources, you start depending on people, and then this leverage kind of starts slipping in, right? And it's like, hey, I want to make sure I please this person,
Yeah.
right? Now, are you pleasing because you love them, or are you pleasing because you're fearful of what they might or might not do, all the way to the point of leaving you?
Yeah. But I think these are Eurocentric ideas.
Ooh,
And
speak to it.
when you talk about Eurocentric customs, values, and cultures, they're very different from Africana ideas.
Mm.
So you have a combination of two things: is that we're capitalistic by nature because we're Eurocentric, and the Eurocentric idea creates this sense where I only have to be loyal to you in order to get something from you. We're not family. We're not community. It's when it do the ends justify the means.
Right.
So I think therein lies the challenge when you see the Eurocentric worldview of essentially it's exploitation. It's how can I exploit you to get what I want? Now, loyalty, I will tell you, is harder to find because most of the time when you're talking to people, they're not understanding that loyalty is not something that you just give and that's it. Loyalty is to death. Loyalty is to the end. Loyalty is when the king says, go fight, you might die. So loyalty isn't conditional based off of just how I feel today. Because on your point of love, what I tell people is when most people say they love you, what they really mean is they love how you make them feel.
Correct.
And if you stop making them feel this way, then the love that they had will dissipate. And so the idea of fealty has nothing to do with my feelings. It's like my obligation. It's my oath. It's what I owe you as opposed to what you want from me. And I think therein lies, I think, the contrast where it's not optional. You give it because it's who you are, because you're a loyal person, as opposed to what is the requirement or what does the Lord dictate for you to do or be. And I think that's where we get some difference from.
I would have to agree. And so I think when it comes down to this kind of quid pro quo life that we live, right?
Yes.
Because
yeah.
it becomes a barter of information, it becomes a barter of goods, it becomes this trust factor because us as human beings, which is why religion start existing in some of the studies that I've had, like there had to be an accountability system.
Yes.
Right. And the accountability system kind of came with how you treated each other. Right. So it was like you wash my back, I wash yours. Right. Because it took people to help each other and trust each other to build villages.
Yes.
Right. Which is why when you take the rudimentary thought of how societies and things come about and how you build and evolve, right? Like it used to be a certain way, but now we look at it differently. Just like marriage, I believe marriage, it used to be based on security and combining funds to, or even before that, it was about gathering food and warmth and right now it's known that statistically people who have families live longer than people who don't.
Yeah.
Right. And so looking at all that stuff, when it comes down to the loyalty of being a human to another human being, that's reverence, right? You expect certain things, but when it comes down to the individual level and dealing with people, it becomes more quid pro quo and like, what have you done for me lately? And is that consistent? And does that line up for me enough to keep moving forward with you?
Yeah. And then you have to bring in the power dynamic of it, because usually the people, the Lord or the person who gave fealty is the one with the resources. So there was a necessity for your loyalty, because if you didn't give it to him, like I said, there was a consequence. And I think that we've gotten to a point where we see the consequence, but it can come from social status, where you see a lot of people today where they would get divorced, but it ain't financially in their best interest.
Correct.
And so your loyalty is to your necessity. And I think therein goes to a larger issue that the Lord of the land or the person that's in charge who you gave fealty to did allow provision. And I think that was apart from you or what them. It's because of what they got, because you were measured by this. As a landlord, I'm measured by if my plumbing is good. See, if the king subjects are not doing good, it makes the king look bad. And so the same thing with like loyalty and fealty. It's like the person that you're giving it to has an obligation to make sure that they understand that.
Yeah. Give it back. Like there's an understanding. And so that's why I actually talk about making love logical. Right. So we talk about different things, but my concept of making love logical is taking those concepts of hey, since we're going to both be lords to each other,
Yeah.
because that's what it is, right? We need to actually be in line. So that's why I talk about, love and fear. And like, you have to love people like, or you fall in love and treat love like God, right? So
Yeah.
if people believe in God a certain type of way, you tend to follow or be in those particular groups. And just like with love, you love people a certain way and you tend to fall in love and be with people who love the way you do.
Yeah.
Right. But it would be smart to do that, right? But
Yeah.
sometimes love is so illogical. Is you meet people and it's like, oh, this is how I feel right now, and I want to do this and I want to do that,
Yeah.
not knowing that you're getting yourself into this business contract
Oh,
of life, right?
yeah.
It's like you now have a new lord.
Yeah. I mean, and should it make sense is the question, because I think that's a problem we run into now, is that there's the one sure way to find out if you're in love is that irrationality is no longer in the question, because you see people all the time. You're like, why are they still with this person? And it don't make no sense to nobody else. And
None.
you can't explain it. You can't, try to give you an idea why it happens, but that's just the way it is. And I find that when you talk about the fear aspect of it, the fear is important because fear allows us to have a control that love won't give us.
Ooh,
And I
yes.
think that is a challenge for us, because it's easy to use fear because it's coercive. And the idea that love is sacrificial, meaning that I don't care what you say, I care what you do.
Right.
And we've all heard the thing. For God so loved the world, he did what? He gave.
He
The
gave his only begotten son.
So the idea is that either love is sacrificial, but what am I sacrificing for it? Because to me, if you ain't sacrificed nothing for it, how much love is there? If it's convenient for you, because the sacrifice, it ain't just about money, it's about your time, it's about your energy, it's about all those things that you are. And I would tell people, man, when you talk about sacrifice, it's the one thing I would say that matters more to those who have less.
Yes.
Because if I got $10 and you want to borrow $1, it's different if I got 10 million and you want to borrow $1. So that
Correct.
matters to the metric. And I think that sometimes people will give you their time, which is ultimately their money that can be converted.
Correct.
So they may not have a lot of money, but if you need something, they're there for you. So that kind of loyalty to me, it means a lot more than somebody who's just doing it because it doesn't cost them anything.
Ooh, it's time for the capper section. It's like, I don't expect you to see my view from the back seat. And I think in this particular confident opinion section, my confident opinion is going to be that a mother is the only love that you will get unconditionally, generally speaking. And once you lose that particular love, you'll meet all love past that is conditional, even with your father, I believe. You know what I mean? And so when it comes to this world we live in of love and fear, I think there's a delicate balance, right? So since I lost my mother, like, I don't have this fear of losing people.
Yeah.
Right. And so it gives me this edge of leverage with people that they can't squeeze me out, because this whole coercive versus consensual like existence, it feels like a squeeze when you're with people that you have now combined resources, you now depend on them.
Yeah.
And so you have, sometimes when it comes down to this, one person might want one thing, another person that wants another. Then there's this negotiation, but the negotiation comes down to whether so and so and so and so is going to continue to do what they normally do.
Yeah. But I think that the problem that we run into is we define the word love, I believe, incorrectly, because we use love as an umbrella term.
Yes.
Because if you go to the Greeks, the Greeks have over 200 different words for love. Philia is brotherly love. How I love my brothers. I will
Philia,
love
which is why Philadelphia.
Philadelphia, city of brotherly love. They have agape, which is unconditional. You have eros, which is sensual love, which is just passion. But so when we say love, sometimes we say it to cover a genre as opposed to a specific. So to your point, your mother is supposed to love you as only a mother can love a child, which is different love from how a father loves a child. So we can't compare or conflate their loves because a mother is a nurturer by nature.
Correct.
Mother nature is a nurturer, where the father is usually the disciplinary one. Usually the father don't get love until you grow up and realize he told you the right stuff. And then it's like,
that's
okay,
it. Like, man, you were right the whole time.
because dad is the one who gave you that hard truth about life.
Right.
And so I think that when we start to talk about love without differentiating that I'm supposed to love my cousins different than I have for my familiar, my blood, my brother. Right. But you have some people who their cousins are like their brothers.
Correct.
Because they grew up together. So there's a different love there. And so when I think what we cheapen love by comparing it to people who it was never designed to be compared to. For example, with a spouse, you're supposed to have eros, which is romantic love, which is the physical. But this type of love is usually tied not to the love we think of. This is just physical attraction, eros, Cupid with the starstruck. Oh, whatever she said, beautiful. I can't see anything she do wrong because I got the googlies. And so I think therein lies our challenge is we have to be specific and not think that the mother's love, although as important and as unique as it is more important than any other type of love. Because I will tell you this, if you get too much of anything, it will be corrosive to you. Because if you only get mother's love and you don't get any of that contrast, you might not be prepared for some of the issues of life. Because mom can't prepare you to how to deal with certain things.
Yeah, there ain't no mic to that one.
And so I think that's where I say love has to be measured to the individual relationship. So each person that you know that you say you love should be measured differently. And there are people, and that's why I think when it goes back to this, yes, you can love more than one person. This whole idea of you only can love one person is a Eurocentric idea. Yeah. Because you go back to Africa, it wasn't about that. Because a lot of times, this people don't tell you. When kings in Africa got married, they may have had hundreds of wives, but they may have not slept with all of them.
Right.
Because the wife was not about eros. It was about power. It was about your husband just died in the war. You're a widow. I will take you into my house.
Right.
Not for physical, because I got wives already, but now your children will have an inheritance. So we've had this idea where you can only love people one like a soulmate. And that idea is made by Hallmark to sell cards and Cupid to sell rings. It is not it's not pragmatic.
So I talk about soul ties, right?
Ooh.
Not soulmate.
I know what you mean.
If I say soulmate, I say soulmates that reflects soul ties, right? Because people try to individualize. It's like, how do you meet a soulmate when there's like a billion people in the world? You just happen to be in your particular area. You just happen to bump into that one person who just happened to be your particular soulmate. Get the but you know, it's one of these things where when you take the time, you can get to know a person so well where it feels like you're touching their soul and you want to be around them. And so going back to the make love logical, I think that's beautiful because the different levels of consciousness of love make sense. Yeah. Brotherly love, cousin love, cousins that become elevated to brothers type stuff. You know what I mean? It all exists.
Auntie, uncle.
Yeah. But see, here's the crazy thing, because the way we're brought up, the first love that you have for the opposite sex comes in the form of the parent.
Yeah.
And so there are things that you're looking for in a spouse that your mother had or your father had, consciously or unconsciously.
Oh, yeah.
if they were present, right? And
Yeah.
they portrayed some sort of
Yeah.
positive, and
A lot of people,
so
their grandmothers took on the role of mother.
a lot of people,
Yeah.
like,
That
and
was a
even if
very,
you
yeah.
had parents,
Yeah.
the grandparents were more of a parent than the parent.
Which is part of the challenge that we run into today, is because I don't use the word soul tie anymore, only because of the religious connotations to it. I believe it's a frequency. I believe we vibrate with people who are on our level, that we like. I think it's like an energy,
Yeah.
because when you cross energies with people, you know how I think it's like a magnet, right?
Mm-hmm.
If a magnet is put in the right direction, it will do what? Attract.
For
It's
sure.
magnetic. It's a force. But if
Right.
those magnets are turned the opposite way, they will retract. That's magnetic. And I think people are like this. You have people who are attracted to you, to your energy, to who you are, and it is just easy. Boom. And then you have people who are repelled. But I find, and this is where I think the biggest challenge comes in, is if something repels us, our nature wants us to go after it.
Oh, yeah. You want what you
We
can't
don't.
have.
Exactly. And we
Right.
don't understand those forces. And I think that's a challenge that we run into, because when you start to talk about the idea of souls, I think you get into the area of mythology with this.
Okay. Yeah.
You get into an area of mythology, because I do believe that there are people who believe that the soul, it's immaterial. It's your thought, your intellect, your conscious, your will. And I think
Right.
therein lies a challenge, because you'll find people who you're connecting with. And I'm not talking about physical, because I
Right.
think when people say soul tie, it's about like physical intimacy. But
Oh
it's
no.
not. But it's not.
No.
You can connect with somebody on a higher plane, like on an astral kind of level, that
Right.
is a deeper emotional need than anything you can get physical.
Yeah, when I use the word soul, because you're absolutely right, it has the religious connotation,
Yeah.
and so I soul tie all this, but I refer to soul energy,
Okay.
right? Just like that book, right? So
Yep.
I don't know how far you gotten on the seat of the soul,
I got a
but
little bit.
right, and so that particular energy is what I refer to as the soul, and those
I
efforts.
got you. I'm tracking.
You know what I mean? It's those efforts to get towards that authentic power,
Yes.
which is with soul. So as we as we keep it moving, I wanted to talk about our particular section when we're talking about what's the difference between me and you, and we were talking about that specific difference in loyalty and fealty. I believe needs to have there needs to be conversation with people and what the difference is between what's expected loyalty and what fealty looks like, because not separating the difference gives people the umbrella term, just like with love, to just categorize everything as loyalty, when when you don't look at love and you don't look at things the same. This can cause a direct conflict in
Oh
how
yeah.
you deal, because people want to own you and people want to own your actions to the point where it's like that Eurocentric monogamy, or
Yeah.
the Eurocentric, hey, I want, if you don't do what I say
Yeah.
or what makes me feel good at all times,
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
and there's no loyalty there.
Well,
And I
because
think
I think
that's I
because the
think that's wrong.
words, yeah, and the words can be interchanged, because fidelity is the same thing as faithfulness, being faithful. And so the problem I think that we run into today is that we speak for our future self with our current knowledge. And so that creates a problem for us, because I believe that when you talk about faithfulness, it's I took a vow to do something, right? So
Uh,
if I go against my own word, because remember, if before I talk to anybody, I must first sign a contract with myself.
Correct.
And so I'm going to say, I am going to provide blah, blah, blah. Now, when I don't do what I said I was going to do, For example, if I said I'm gonna come through with $50 for you, right? And if I didn't do that, then I wasn't faithful. I wasn't loyal. I didn't come through for you. But
Right.
I didn't have to say that. I could have just been like, I can't do it for you.
Right.
So I think that we sometimes put ourselves in situations where it's like, look, man, you got married, but you still want to have a bunch of randoms. Okay. Now I didn't make you do that. I didn't make you commit to nothing. I didn't make you say no vows. And if you had a situation worked out with your significant other, well, y'all could do that, and that's great. But if she's under the pretense that you only gonna be with her and you want to be with some randoms, you gotta have a conversation with yourself first. With yourself first, and say, hey, look, my today me made a promise for the tomorrow me that I couldn't keep. You know, and that's a tough conversation.
But so I think people need to have the psychological safety to be able to say that they misspoke.
Fair.
Right.
Oh, yeah.
But then if there's a propensity to always misspeak, then that's going to fall upon the person and who they are. But when we talk about men, I think that men find themselves in situations of not being in power when it comes to sex, with women being the gatekeeper to sex, finding themselves in positions of having to bend the truth, lies of omission, and things of that nature because of the foundation of what society has laid down for what an expectation of is in any approach or any courtship.
Oh yeah, and I live by an axiom. I say, look, man, you do not put a potato in hot water unless you intend to smash it. Okay, because at 212 degrees, water starts to boil. So you cannot put yourself in situations, because I find that this is the thing. What we find out is that it's not, to your point, yes, we none of us are here walking as saints among us. We all are fallen. We all have ideas that are not as enlightened, that could be better, and we make mistakes. But when you start talking about the ramifications of your decisions on others, we do not control what other people think of our mistakes or not, whether they forgive or not. So I may say, hey, yeah, I made a mistake, but the faithfulness, because I believe that you can be together with people that you don't trust if you have the right motive. Because I find a lot of times that there are people who don't trust the people that they're with, but they either feel I have no alternative. I know, and it's like, look, at least he respects me enough to not put it in my face, you know, to be smart about it. He respects me enough not to. Well, because I will tell you, and I've seen a lot of people that don't know how to have tough conversations. You know, they don't. They don't have tough conversations.
Well, I'm gonna tell you like this. Unpopular opinion alert, but might be actually popular. I don't think most people know how to have difficult conversations or interaction.
Yeah.
And then I've now recently started acknowledging and saying this stuff to some of my white Anglo-Saxon type people, like, yo, y'all would not do well at a space game. Like, y'all are so damn tense. Like, good Lord. It's like, y'all can't handle not one difficult interaction. You know what I mean? Because I think white people live so, I'm going to say fake for a lack of better words, but live so, they're so projected, trying to be so The Sims. You know what I mean? It's like there's just this fakeness is just all over the place, man. And so, gosh, what I actually tie it to actually feeling your soul, that energy. You know what I mean?
Well,
Like,
Du Bois called it. He called it a crisis of having to have two personalities at once. Double consciousness.
Double
consciousness.
Double consciousness.
So when you have a situation where you have double consciousness, what you'll find out is you're never comfortable in your skin.
Never.
You're never comfortable where you're at, because I don't know who I need to be at this particular time. And the most confident people know who they are and who they need to be, because we all have role conflict. Like
Right.
I'm a dad today, I'm a friend tomorrow, I'm a husband the next day, I'm a this,
Right.
and we all are shifting between roles. And when you
Right.
have people, and I will tell you this, and for America is a great example. In America, we are socially isolated when it comes to our challenges, because you got to remember, there was never really a time apart from slavery when white people and black people lived in very close proximity to each other.
Right.
See, and this is what the ironic part is. This is what urban sprawl was, white flight. See, the idea was, if you were a white person and you had to live around black people, your family wasn't that financially well off.
Right.
And them some of the coolest people you're gonna meet,
For
because
sure.
they grew up in a culture where they were exposed to a lot of stuff.
Right.
And some of the times, I will tell you, a lot of, especially black people growing up, if you grow up around primarily white people, your parents were probably affluent.
Correct.
And they can be some of the most uncomfortable ones around black folk because they ain't used to it. So I think you have the same contrast on both sides, and you have very few people can walk through both spaces.
Yeah, I know.
Can walk through both spaces. So I will tell people that I'm not as concerned as about the conscience of people, because I feel that we've taken on the mantle that wasn't our mandate, meaning it's not our responsibility to teach people things that your parents should have taught you. Like if you're 30 years old, you don't know something, you should have learned that when you was 8. I'm not gonna give it to you all in 2 minutes.
Yo, I feel like I had that same thought today. Like at some point in time, you just get tired of like teaching.
Yo,
you
the same. No, you get tired of teaching the same lessons, because if it's a new lesson, you good.
Oh, that's
It's
true.
the
That's
same
true.
lesson.
Well, but if it's the same lesson to a different person,
Yeah,
you feel like it's a new. I mean, but sometimes it just depends on who you're talking to. Because if it feels like somebody who's interested in learning,
yeah.
you're like, oh hell yeah. But if it's somebody that's that same old like rejection or the just dissension, like the same old dissension that's based in bias and fallacy, it's like, and so that's where the frustration comes in, where you're having that same argument and it's like, I am tired. And it's like,
No,
why is it
bruh.
why it should not be black people or anybody's responsibility to teach other people.
Well, but see, and I think this is where you talk. This is, I think, at the crux of the challenge of the double consciousness, because in America, what we run into most of the time is we're dealing with philosophy,
Ooh.
we're dealing with theory, and we've never brought the theory to the abstract. For example, there are a lot of white people in America who still think that black people are subhuman and inferior. We know this. They say it, right? And my question then becomes, is when have people ever been told that we are not? Because they used to talk to us and about us as being inferior. And I've been doing a lot of research on this, and I haven't come across any campaigns, any media, any government issue that says the contrast. All they told us, hey, we passed some laws now, Civil Rights Act, but passing laws don't change the thinking. After the time, just because the South lost the war, they didn't stop thinking, well, these are humans now. No, they still thought that. And they taught this to their children. And so my thing is, I asked people, I said, this dude said, Black Lives Matter. I said, when did they start? When? No, when? Like, when did Black lives start mattering in America?
Boom.
When date? It wasn't from 1776 to pick a date. When did our lives matter here? When did we stop using these tropes of birth of a nation, of we've had so much indoctrination and propaganda that we were animals, we were inferior, we were beasts, we were savages, we were fed to alligators. This is all this stuff that was said about us. And I'm just asking, when did they counter the narrative about these things?
They never
did. All they did was mass incarcerate. As soon as civil rights ended, mass incarceration went like this.
Well, some very smart person went back to what the Constitution said in the 13th Amendment and said, holy shit, Yo, slavery's still a thing if we get people locked up.
It is.
And that was
So they were, and so that's why as soon as the 13th Amendment was passed, Virginia and all these southern states started passing vagrancy laws. Hundreds of thousands of people who were now freed, who had nowhere to go, they pretty much criminalized you not being on a plantation.
correct.
So how the hell can I be free if I step off this plantation? You're gonna put me in a jail, and then convict leasing is you're gonna sell me back to the plantation. So how am I free, people? Explain it. And so this is what we don't talk about. We don't talk about how after slavery, in some instances, it was actually worse for us.
It was.
People think that slavery ended and everybody saying kumbaya. It's like, no, bro. And more importantly, the thinking did not change. The idea of the reason you had to be lynched was not changed. And I think therein lies this biggest challenge that we run into today, is because until there is a narrative counter, and I'm not saying everybody, because I do believe that you do have people who are enlightened, but you push somebody and they know. It's like, if I know I can push your buttons by calling you one word that could take, like, there is one word in American history that actually functions as a time machine. Like they say time travel has not been invented. That's a lie. There's a word you can call somebody that could take me back to 1850 really fast. and it's like, look, this ain't Back to the Future. Ain't no Marty McFly.
Yeah.
And that's a challenge because we understand our history. And for those who don't, ultimately it's frustrating because I have a lot of conversations with people, and I know we're the only people in the world, I believe, that I've come across in the history of humanity who has to explain to people who traumatized them that they were traumatized. Like, you never hear somebody go to a Jewish person and be like, well, the Armenian Holocaust was actually the first time the word Holocaust was used. It wasn't used in 1940s. The Holocaust happened in the Armenians in the turn of the 19th century, where millions of them were killed, but we don't compare that. The only people who struggle is compared is us. The only people who are told, well, let's don't talk about the past. I'm like, this in the country of remember everything. Remember the Alamo, remember 9/11, remember the Maine, remember everything, but forget about our trauma that our great grandparents did to yours.
No, not that 9/11 stuff every year,
bro.
Every year.
And I'm not opposed to it.
I'm not either.
My only thought process is, don't tell me I can't talk about what your family historically did to mine, and you get fragility, and your fragility come up. Because if your fragility come up, that's fine. But it does not invalidate the idea that we can remember it, and we have to talk about it.
Right. And it's time for a Cockley explanation.
Give it to him.
Christianity, capitalism, colonialism, 3 C's, critical race theory, class, tribalism, race. When you factor all that into where we live, there's a conversation to be had about, we're talking about love and fear.
Yep.
And we operate in a way that we're trying to figure out what we love and fear. And so my Cockley explanation is, at the end of the day, most people only love themselves, which is why we find ourselves in positions that nobody actually cares, because Black people, we care about what we care about. It could be other Black people, it could be whomever. But I think that inside the Black community, people don't care about other Black people until there's a situation like globally or nationally that creates a Black solidarity through trauma. And at that same exact time, white people retreat to white solidarity and they don't say a word.
Bro, I will tell you this. This book changed my life. This book changed what I think about Black people. It changed what I know about Black people. And it also changed the ideology of why we think what we think about each other. Because we have a syndrome that we don't talk about. We all have a syndrome that, and guess what? So listen, the American Medical Association said that we cannot define what racism is. We cannot make racism or racist people, we cannot get a classification in our DSM, right? You go to DSM, right? We can't get a classification for it. But their reason was there are so many people who have this condition in America, making a diagnostic criteria is impossible. Yeah. Listen to this logic. This is the American Psychological Association has said there are too many racist people in America to get a criteria for diagnostic, right? Now, I submit to you this. There are too many Black people in America who suffer from this that we won't get a but Dr. DeGroy, she did the work. She did the research.
So what? Give us a little bit. Give us a little bit of it. What's it saying?
Let me explain, man. Okay, so slavery was a social system in America. See, it wasn't just about capitalism. It wasn't just about money. It wasn't just about tobacco and rice and sugar and cotton. It was a social system that created a strata of people who were subhuman. Mm-hmm. This is where people don't understand the historical context because yes, slavery is historical. We've talked about it. It's been Greek and Rome, but never did the slavery do what it did here by creating an indelible mark upon the people and essentially giving slavery by birthright, meaning you were not a slave because you lost the war. You were a slave because your mama was Black, period. Anyway, so this book talks about the trauma because when slavery was ended, how many therapists came into our community? What effort was used to reconnect families who were sold to Mississippi Delta? There was no effort. No. So anyway, so what happens in slavery after it ended? It created a trauma, and it altered our DNA, which is called epigenetics. Meaning, trauma can alter your DNA, and that can be passed on to your children. So, for example, I'll give you two examples. If your child was showing signs of growth and maturity, they could be sold by the slave master, right? So the mother or the father, when the slave master said, "Hey, look at little Tommy, he getting big," you would say, "He a little runt. He ain't nothing. He a pipsqueak. He good for nothing." So we would talk negatively on our children because we did not want them to be sold away from us.
Oh, wow.
So we would diminish them. So if your child brought home an A, you'd be like, well, if you're home a C, you'd be like, I need an A, because we never learned to esteem our children in slavery. Because when we esteemed them, they could be sold from us. And as a protective measure, we would always downplay. Look how clumsy that boy is. So that was one thing that we did, right? And when slavery ended, we kept the same culture. Wow. Because when you don't esteem somebody, they have vacant esteem, and they're going to look for esteem in other places. Another thing is this. During slavery, a child, the slave master did not enforce slavery in the social system. The parents did.
Correct.
The parents made you the slave. So the parent, if you show any sign of talking back, of rebellion, they would beat you to the inch of your life. Right. Because if you show that same disrespect to a white person, it'll get you killed. So the parent had to beat, and up until the last probably generation, we've had that same culture. We beat our children, don't even know why. Because Big Mama did it. So these are cultural things. So when you talk about this syndrome, the two biggest things that it has is this. Why would somebody kill you if they step in your Jordans or if you scratch their new car? Why? Because if I take a culture of people who've never had anything. And so now this possession is how I remove the stigma of slavery is what I possess. So if you damage that, you take me back there. And therein lies our challenge. And we've never talked about this as a community. So now we don't understand that this dude right here got no self-esteem. Nobody's ever told him he loved him. Nobody's ever encouraged him, because remember, love during slavery was a liability.
Right.
If you loved them kids and they was taken from you, now of course you're gonna heartbreak it, but you had to treat them distant.
Yeah. You had to have emotional distance. Distance.
And we still have it today. It didn't
in
change.
the wrong way. In the wrong way.
Exactly. And so when you start to talk about diagnostics, one of the problems we run into is we go back to what you were talking about: capitalism, colonialism, all those isms. And now what people don't realize, and this is, I would say, I try my hardest not to be negative against Black people, because there's already enough against us as it is. Right. We have a 24-hour news system that's designed to portray us as criminal. But I will tell you, the worst ones are this: is that during slavery, the Black overseer was always worse than the white overseer.
Oh yeah.
Because they had an incentive to be more cruel to us, because if they weren't, it could have been done back to them. So that's why I believe you have people today. I'll have a discussion with a white person, and then they'll bring up a Black person like Candace Owens or Thomas Sowell, or it's like a Black person who agrees with their thinking as if to invalidate my experience.
Right.
Now, they don't realize they're operating under the slave system, because that's what slavery did. Because the slave didn't want you to be mad at them. They want you to be mad at this Black person.
Right.
With this point of view. So when I point these out, these are cultural, and it did not just affect us. It affected white people too, because some of them still have the master syndrome. That's all that Karen is. A Karen is a white lady who still has the master syndrome. Because if I'm a Black person, I'm supposed to stop what I'm doing, be apologetic, say yes, ma'am, and no, ma'am, and avert my eyes and get off the sidewalk, because they still think this way. And that ain't the truth anymore. So we're dealing with these cultural issues, and we're trying to not only survive, but to thrive. And therein lies the challenge of individualism, because I'm an individual first. Right. Because I'm individual, and individuals pursuing their self-interest, and therein lies the challenge. Because now I'm retired, I ain't gotta go to nobody's job, and my self-interest is truth. I want people to know the truth, and we have been lied to, systemically lied to. And we have been taught a history that portrayed the people who abused us as heroes. Now, last thing I will say is this: we are the only culture. This is my cocky opinion. Confident.
Cocky opinion.
We are the only people.
Cocky explanation.
Cocky explanation. We are the only people in the history of the world whose history is taught to us by the enslavers of us. Mm-hmm. The Chinese do not have Jamaicans teaching their kids Chinese history. Yeah. You know what I mean? The Germans don't have the Brazilians teaching German history to them. Right. And if you're no one who teaches you, no one who hates you can teach you. And it's not even the individuals. They made a system to detach themselves from it. I'm an executor of it. Yeah. And that's why I tell people racism, the ism part, I made a video about that. Racism is a system, a structure, a belief. And Black people in America have created no systems, no structures, or no beliefs about anybody. So when somebody tried to call me a racist, I'm like, racist? How?
You ain't never had any power to oppress somebody.
Because like this, because people think they're capitalists. I'm like, no, you're not a capitalist. A capitalist is somebody who owns the means of production. You don't own the means of. If you own that factory down there, you are a capitalist, because that's what a capitalist is. You just buy the products of the capitalist.
You're a consumer.
Same thing, exactly. Same thing with racist. I can't be racist because I didn't make a system of racism. The only way a Black person could be racist in America is if that Black person supports white supremacist ideology, thoughts, and beliefs. Right. And there are a lot of Black people out there who do support those white supremacy ideologies and beliefs. I could save some names, but they ain't necessary. And so
on that one.
And that is our challenge, is to say that's why we got to be careful with these people who are saying that we could be racist. I said
Right.
we could if we made a system that could disenfranchise people. We don't have that. And so we are victims of it. So when they put it back on you, it's just them trying to, it's like the best example is an inheritance, right? If you're a white person in America, you inherited something. It's called racism. Your parents gave it to you. Your parents and grandparents fought in most instances for you to not be around black people. They fought for you to vote. So they give you your inheritance. Now, it's not socially acceptable to accept your inheritance in public because it ain't good. But it's like that's what they gave for you. They left you this system. And what we're saying is, hey, look, instead of you saying, hey, I'm not a racist, that's like saying I didn't get my inheritance. Yes, you did. Right. You got it by birthright. And so our birthright wasn't it. Yeah. So I tell people all the time, when you start to get into this ideology, is that he who controls the definition of the words control the argument. If I can change slave to inmate, then I can win the argument. And we, for the first time in the U.S. history, are challenging what you call this.
Yeah.
Like I call it injustice. You call it justice. Now let's figure out who's right.
Right.
Who's right. And I think therein why we have to be very precise with these definitions, because you'll find yourself arguing that you're not a racist on the basis of your actions, not the system that their parents and grandparents built.
Right. So what I'm hearing is, first of all, like if you're not white, you can't be racist unless you buy into the white, unless you buy into the white,
unless you support white supremacist ideology, thoughts, and beliefs. And a lot of black people, in order to be successful in America, you have to not concern yourself with the issues of black people. It's kind of like a caveat. It's like, hey, if you don't care about the plight of black people and you're relatively intelligent in America, you can be Candace Owens.
Oh yeah.
Because you don't care. I mean, if you don't care about our struggle, and I'm not saying her name to point her out, because I understand that when George Floyd was killed, she made a video. She made a video talking about how he wasn't a good dude. And I'm like, well, this ain't what it's about. But what did she do? That video was shared by white people who then took her argument.
Right. The slaves. Do you use just like that?
And if we are in conflict, if somebody is using the argument that you're making to attack me with, that's a problem.
Right.
It's a problem. Because either I'm going to change my argument or I'm going to shut up.
Right.
Because I am not going to be a mouthpiece for the continued perpetuation of the traumas that we face here. I'm just not going to do it because there's enough people doing it already.
Well, so that's I think the overarching issue when it comes down to the whole love or fear thing for me, because when you live in a system that you have no power in, you literally don't know if you're doing something because there's a genuine love for it, or you doing it because you're in fear of losing some sort of power, be it, information power, be it social power.
But this is what it is. This is what January 6th was about. The white supremacists in America know that in 20 years, like for example, if people only 45 and under could vote, there would only been about 3 or 4 5 red states. They understand that the tide is changing against the ideas because we've hidden racism in political ideology.
Oh yes, that's it.
And we've not allowed the decoupling of that to happen. Because I will tell you, it's the ideas that you support, not what your color is. I don't care what your color is. What ideas do you support? Because it's the ideas that are perpetuated that lead to the biggest challenge, especially when it comes to how Black people are perceived in America, which is what I research. This is part of what I do because I understand that for every positive image of a Black person, there's 10 negative.
10.
and it outweighs it, maybe. And that's why I find you'll never read a newspaper where a white person is referred to as a thug. You'll never go to after a sporting event where a hockey team wins and they tear up the city. Oh, they were just having a little fun. They got out of hand, went overboard. It wasn't a riot. It wasn't a mob. Or 4 people died. But see, their language is what catches us because we're not talked about in these ways.
Right.
And I think therein is our challenge but I believe it's fear. I believe fear is a big component of it because the fear is deeper. It's what Jefferson said. He said it's like slavery is like holding a wolf by the ear. You can't safely hold it and you can't safely let it go. And I think there's this fear that Black people in America will do to white people what they've done to us. Mm-hmm. And that is no basis because after all this time, it's like, look, we want to be left alone. Like, honestly, people don't want vengeance. Because I was talking to this lady the other day. She's talking about, anytime somebody brings up the topic of reparations to me, my first thought is it's a deflection. Yeah. I said, look, man, you cannot repair something that ain't even like this is how I look about it. If my water is overflowing in my kitchen, right? Should I turn the water off first, or should I try to soak up the water that's already on the floor?
We should turn that water off.
See, my thought process, the water ain't been turned off yet.
Right.
You have to turn the water off before the cleanup can begin.
Right.
And until we turn the water off, the cleanup ain't gonna happen. Because what we've been doing is we've been putting towels down.
Right.
Yeah. To sop up the water. And I'm like, no, well, turn the water off. But the problem is that we don't control the spigot. Okay. All they do, they keep getting us more towels.
So what's the figure? So what's the figurative water in this particular?
The figurative water is the system that they built, the injustice system, the legal system, the prosecutor system, like the systems that they have built, the political system, the systems, the structures, the ones that like this. Any law, for example, I'll give you a perfect example, right? Any law in America that was passed before all Black people could vote should be null and void. If that law was, if that law was on the book and we couldn't participate in that vote, it shouldn't be revote. Do it over. That's the system. But see, they're like, look, let's just all sing Kumbaya with our system in place.
Yeah, that's what they forced it.
Yeah, they're like, look,
the whole thing needs to be thrown away.
They like, look, we made Jay-Z a billionaire. Can't y'all just be chill? It's like
Obama was president.
Yeah, it's like, can't y'all just chill? And I'm like, listen, the problem we run into is that we always are giving tokenism. Here's a quarter. Go play the video game. Here. And the problem is, this is why people didn't understand Black Lives Matter. This is why they didn't understand it. They were like, these people are destroying property and the building, and they burnt down the police station. I said, listen, if ain't no justice happening there, what do you need it for?
Well, they ain't no need.
What do we need it for? Because when they didn't get their taxes lowered by the king, they went and burnt up ships. They threw a tea party. They went out.
Tea party. It was a whole tea party.
Yeah, they did all this. But they think that we just gonna sit here with injustice and just keep, we shall overcome. Talking about we gonna pray. I'm like, no, leave that alone. Leave that for your church. And what we found out is this. Is that with specificity, to your point, how you turn that off that water is the problem. Right. With specificity, I would say this. One of the main things we have to do, and I like the term objectively, because in a country that has never been objectively fair, never. The country has never been objectively fair. What they've been is objectively unfair, but because they were the majority, it was objective because they, for example, in 1980, 80% of all the patrol cops were white men, right? So when they beat up a Black person and said it was reasonable, well, of course you thought it was, because we wasn't on the force. It wasn't reasonable for us. Right. Yeah, it's like, and so their systems were created under the guise of one is if we can't separate you from us, if you're going to integrate, you have to play by our rules.
Right.
The assimilation culture, which is why I find that the water is turned off by, first off, just acknowledging that you built a system. It's like you talk to people, it's like you know that your forefathers built a system on the subjugation of black people, and they've done nothing but make a little adjustments to it. The Southern strategy, right? Remember the Southern strategy when integration?
Yeah.
They was like, look, they've created policy, and now what we're having first off to do is just reverse engineering what they built, but they built it so stealthily. You have to actually research it to understand how deep the tentacles go, because I believe they go all the way back to the beginning.
That Southern strategy, as we're hitting around our hour.
Yep.
That Southern strategy, you're talking about the one from around the Reconstruction time. We're talking about the 60s.
The 60s.
The 60s when and that's when they started. We had to look at racism differently. When I say we,
yes,
they changed. Like, hey, we can't be doing this N-word stuff and be
we gotta stop that.
Go to the political frame, which is why now white people can exonerate themselves from any situation. Like, I'm not racist. I ain't calling no N-words or doing this and doing that. They're talking about the blatant racism the way it used to look, not the covert that exists right now.
Yeah.
You know,
and my biggest takeaway with that, I think Dr. Ibram X. Kendi has a really good definition of racism, because too often it's like we associate racism with the KKK.
Mm-hmm.
We associate racism with antiquated policies of the one drop rule.
Right.
But now it's ideology, it's thoughts, it's policy. Right. Because I believe that racism should only be allowed in two places: your heart and your house. The only place where it should be acceptable. As soon as you leave out that door, there should be policy to inhibit it, to prohibit it, which ultimately is social disesteem, meaning it's not socially acceptable to be a racist now, to be openly, it's not. But the problem is that for us, we've never controlled the narrative about what we thought. Right. It was we never controlled the narrative about what laws the police are going to be enforcing this week. They didn't invite us. We wasn't going to those town hall meetings because we couldn't even vote. So what has happened is, and that's why even the term grandfather, the grandfather clause, that's what it is. It's like, hey, look, even though y'all got to take this literacy test, if your grandfather could vote, you could vote. See, so let's remove those grandfather clauses.
Correct.
Where they need to be removed, and some of it is symbolic, because I will tell you this: supremacy and iconography work hand in hand.
Ooh,
they do. You cannot remove supremacy without the imagery that supports it. You know, but you now get into other issues, white Jesus, all those other stuff. You know, I'm like,
that, you know, hey Doc, you know where that's gonna take us if we start touching on that. All right, look, so as we wrap up another great episode of the Lighthouse series, presented by Objectively Aggressive, I wanted to close out as we talk about love and fear. Yep. It's hard to understand, you know, where we lie unless you're paying particular attention to where you sit in this world and in society and how you need to move based on the structure.
Yep.
And so to understand what decisions you're making based on love or fear, needs or wants, is based on a system that you might not have that you have no control over. And so are you doing things because you love it based on some sort of assimilation? Right? Like, these are things to question, but that's why people should know why they're doing what they're doing.
Yep.
You know, and know where you are in life, right? And know why you're doing it, because, like, here's the thing. If you are existing in this world and your only goal is to get money, I think you're living from a standpoint of fear,
Yeah.
right? But if you just like we that book, The Seat of the Soul, and I always quote that because it talks about constant soul, like reaching towards authentic power. And I say that like if what you do in life is not connected to soul work, meaning energy work, positive energy
Yeah.
work to better the existence of everything around you, like the existence is null and void, and you're therefore existing in some sort of fear complex, and you don't even
Yeah.
know it. So the things that you love are actually you're doing it because you're scared of something.
Yeah.
But that it is what it is. But I can tell you this: it always comes down to money sometime, and this is why we give our one money tip and our one book tip that we didn't give
Okay.
last time. So I'm keeping it I'm keeping it in the realm of some of the stuff that I'm learning and teaching people on the very lowest level. And it's when you're using your phone, you can put your cards on the phone, and when you pay with the phone, what's happening is they're using a secure number
Yeah.
to pay for this interaction, and that's it. When you're like at Walmart or these places that don't have the smart ping, they're getting your information from that card and they're selling that information to third party, which is why you get random numbers and random calls from numbers and things of that nature. But when it
Yeah.
comes to scammers and stuff, that's why using credit cards is better because they don't have access to your bank account.
Oh yeah.
And I like using these because these are actually more secure than using my credit card. And my my quick book tip as we were talking about the different things is I'm gonna go with Lies My Teacher Told Me.
Good book.
Great book. James W. Lowen. It completely exposes a lot of the lies that we were taught. All right. So what you got for your money tip and your book? Your
Man, I'll
book.
start with the book, but we already got it. This book here, man, post-traumatic slave syndrome, traces the origin of the thought that supported slavery. And I think that so often we don't realize that we are still thoughts have creators. And sometimes, depending upon who the person is, the thought can be even more
Right.
heavily. So when you go
Okay.
back into this book, it goes into the origins of how this system, how the person that said all men are created equal could own people.
That's
how we could live with that dichotomy.
right.
Because they had to find a way to avoid the cognitive dissonance of treating people like cattle and still being good people. But
Gotcha.
this book,
Gotcha.
it goes into this history, and even to this day, by not acknowledging a lot of the issues we have today, it just prolongs the healing. It's like I go to the doctor and I say, "Doctor, my foot broken," and my foot literally hanging off. He's like, "Oh, that's just a sprained ankle."
Oh
Like,
yeah.
no, doc, my foot, huh?
Take some
Yeah, my foot,
Motrin.
yeah, my foot's hanging off, but no, it's a sprain. And so my
Yeah.
main tip is that it's like I will tell you this, man. Take calculated risk. You know, I think that a lot of times we play it too safe when it comes to investing, when it comes to things, because we want to get a rainy day fund and follow a 6-month investment strategy. But sometimes it's taking a risk, and sometimes not even if it pays off, it's just being able to do it. Especially as you know, as you're younger, you want to take more risk financially. And I don't think just investing because I think that a lot of times people think of risk as this idea that you don't grow from it, but you're
Right.
growing by putting yourself out there and being
Right.
open. Whether I'm going to invest $100 in a
Right.
startup, you know, or do
Right.
something, but just take a risk, you know,
Take a risk and learn from it. I mean,
learn
because
from it. Yep.
everything life is about struggle and life is about thriving, and you
Yeah.
can't truthfully thrive without struggle.
Yeah,
And
and the
so,
reason, and the reason I say risk is because traditionally, one of the cultural things about slavery is you became very risk averse.
mhm.
You became comfortable with the bondage, and I think this goes to a deeper issue about us in cultural, because I believe that a lot of the challenges that we run into is that we don't trust other Black people to invest.
Oh yeah.
We don't. I mean, like even the Freedman Bank in 1872, it was a bank that was it was for Black investors, and it went under in the 1870s. And we've been putting our money under our mattress ever since, because the white bankers took the money out to cover their debts.
Oh, for sure.
And people didn't realize that their whole life savings were washed away. And what that does psychologically to a person, it teaches it. They teach their children, don't trust them banks.
Don't trust them.
And that's still, we still have that cultural phenomenon. We don't trust institutions, and that, but for good reason.
For good reasons. For good reasons. All right, Doc. I'm gonna end this broadcast. All right. Stay on the line for a second so we can tie up the administrators. But besides that, hey, thanks for everybody for tuning in. Of course, you can check us out. We were normally doing this on Sundays, but we might adjust that during the football season. There's a lot of stuff going on. So you might see us on Tuesdays, but more to come with that. We're out here on Objectively Aggressive.
Cool.